Hey there, my name is Cameron, and you are watching Motion Science. And today we are talking about how to build this. So, as you can see, it's a very visually interesting animation motion design piece, and it's created using a 3D camera, 3D layers and textures, and some really interesting visual effects shots from our friends at Action VFX. So let's dive in and let's create it. Let's start by bringing in this image here. And you can see that this is an image from, I believe it's World War II. And I found this on the internet. It's a free Creative Commons image. I've used it before in another online course I taught. And I really just am drawn to this image. I think it's just a very emotional piece. And I really just wanted to bring some life to it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make it a 3D layer. I'm gonna go to Layer, New, Camera, and I'm gonna select 35 millimeter, make sure depth of field is turned off, and maybe push in a little bit here. Something like so. So we have a little bit of room to work with our 3D camera. So we've got some edges here. I'm gonna set a keyframe for position, and we're going to hit C on our keyboard, kind of move this image maybe up in here. Go to the end of our timeline here. And I should mention this is a 1920 by 1080 comp, 24 frames per second, 5 seconds long. Click OK. And then here at the end, we're going to just kind of move down in here. So we've got this kind of interesting movement here. And, you know, it's not that interesting to start off with. So what can we do to make this a little bit more interesting? Well, what we can do is we can add a parallax to this shot by kind of dividing this shot up into 3 different sections. What I see here is I see a foreground, which is our boat. I see a middle ground here, which is the water with the soldiers in the water. And then I see a background, which is this beach and these clouds up in here. So let's jump into Photoshop and let's cut this image apart. So here I am in Photoshop. And when I'm cutting images out in Photoshop, I like to use the pen tool. It's the tool that I've always used. I like to zoom in as much as possible on an image and get as much detail as possible when I'm cutting an image out. It's all about those little details. And when you're cutting something out like this, you may think like, well, I don't need to probably cut out this line with this hook on the end of it. You know, they're not going to notice that different, you know, if it's there or not there, but I'm telling you, they will notice this. The client will, or whoever you're trying to show this to. So I like to get as much detail in my cutouts as possible. Sometimes I'll be cutting along and get a wrong area, like right here, where I'm getting a soldier cut out with a boat, and I back up and I'm like, okay, undo that. And I just Control Z, back it out. Zoom back in and continue to cut the boat out. An image like this, I'm looking at a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. The more layers you create, the more parallax you can actually create. But 3 layers is typically enough, a foreground, middle ground, and background. Here I am cutting out the parts of the image that shouldn't be included. So again, just finding the areas where I need to cut out, like the water here from the boat, inside these little hooks. Again, it's all about the details, you know, very small little areas, but it makes a big difference when you go to animate this in After Effects. So here I am creating a path. I like to give it a little bit of a feather, like 1 pixel feather, and then duplicating the layers, making a middle ground and a background, and just using the eraser tool to erase the foreground here so that this can be part of the background. And then using like the clone stamp tool and zooming in again and getting as much, you know, as close as we can into some detail. It doesn't have to be perfect for what we're doing here. You're gonna notice some imperfections in the clouds there, but I just select an area and kind of just paint and just remove areas of the image just to create a believable background. And then we're gonna create the middle ground here. We're gonna erase the background like so with the eraser tool, erase the foreground right in here. And then we've got this middle ground, and we need to give it some more detail without that boat. So again, I'm using the clone stamp tool and just trying to give it some area here to work with. If we're not careful when we do parallax like this, you can see overlapping foreground background elements So this isn't a tutorial about cutting this stuff out, but I just wanted to show you this. Very simple process. Next, we're going to move back into After Effects. Okay, so we're back here in After Effects. We've got our image cut apart. I've got it imported in. I brought it in as a composition where I retained the layer sizes. And you can see the layers are here, background, boat, middle. And if I double click on this composition here, I've got the 3 layers just like we had in Photoshop, right? We've got the background, the middle ground, and the boat. So what we want to do here is we want to go back into our comp, select our original Photoshop layer, and we want to replace this with our pre-comp. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I'm going to drag down here and replace, and just let go, and it replaces. So it looks exactly the same, but now we have a pre-comp here. Okay, so I can double click this pre-comp, come in here, and again, it looks the same, but we've got layers here. So what do we need to do? We need to separate these layers. We need to make them 3D. So I'm going to select the 3D button here, hit P for position, and I am going to separate them. I have ADD when it comes to working with numbers in 3D space like this, so I like to be even. So I'm going to take the background back to 1,000 pixels, 1000, and the middle ground I'm going to go to 500 pixels, just like that. And I'm going to leave the foreground, the boat, just like it is. If I switch to 2 views horizontal here, you can see here's the boat, here is the middle ground, and here's the background. Okay, so we can see kind of like what's going on here. Now, what we need to do here is separating these layers in 3D space, they just look strange, right? We need to fill in the gaps here. So what we need to do is we need to scale up this background. So we're going to do that first. We're going to hit S for scale, and we're just going to scale this guy up just like so. And let's hit Shift P for position, and let's bring up this layer here. Something like this. And I'm actually going to go ahead and increase the size again so that we have more room to work with. So let's go up to somewhere about right there. We're going to select the middle ground. It's already at 500 pixels. Hit Shift S for scale. And we are going to scale this one up as well. Something about, about right here. And I think that's good. And the boat's looking pretty good as well. And I think that's going to work for what I'm trying to do here. So now let's just go back to our original camera move here and see what we have. And it still looks exactly the same, right? Even though this is a 3D layer, it looks exactly the same. So that is because this pre-comp is not being viewed as a true 3D layer as a true pre-comp with 3D layers inside of it. So if I go to 2 views here and I zoom in, you can see here is that pre-comp, and it's a flat layer. But if we go back into our pre-comp and we go to 2 views, you can see we have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. So how do we make the foreground, middle ground, and background come through on our pre-comp here? It's really easy. All we have to do is click this button right here. And as soon as I do that, you can see the bounding box gets bigger here and the image changed over here. So this is without just a flat image, collapse. We've got a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. Go back to 1 view here. And now if we move through this, now you can see that parallax that we were going for, okay? So one thing I want to do here, looking at this, is I want to, I think, reverse the move. I want it to kind of come downwards versus up. So I'm going to take both these keyframes here, the first one and the second one, and I'm going to right click, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframes. Boom. So now our move is backwards, okay? And like I said, it looks a little bit weird up in here, but we can do some things to kind of hide that later on here. So that looks pretty cool. I'm liking that so far. So next, let's bring in some elements here from Action VFX. Okay, so again, remember that our background is positioned back at 1000 pixels. That is our background area here. And let's bring in some Action VFX visual effects footage. I love the fiery smoke plumes that you see here. I've also got some close fog. But let's start with plume number 4. Let's bring them down here. And immediately, just looks terrible. Let's make it 3D. Not that the footage looks terrible, just in the composition. I mean, I love this footage. It's great. Hit P for position. I'm going to hit 0. I'm going to turn that to 1000. So now this footage is pushed back in space. And I'm going to scale this down a little bit. Let's go down to a number, something like this, and kind of position it up here. Something like so. So now when we move, it kind of looks like that footage is sitting back there in the background, which is cool. I like that. Now the footage does not look like it blends in to the photo, so we need to do some compositing to fix that. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go to Effect. Let's go to Color Correction, Black and White, to make it black and white. That's a good start. Next, let's go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Gaussian Blur, and let's give it a blur of about 3 pixels. So that's with and without. It's very subtle, maybe a little bit more, maybe 5, maybe 7. Maybe 7. Did I just rotate that on accident? I think I did. Yes, I did. Let's go back and unrotate that. Maybe 7. Maybe that's too much, but we'll come back to it. Next, we're going to go to Effect, Color Correction Curves. And let's just bump up those gray values there. So you can see by doing that, it kind of brings it into this world here. So that's without and that's with. And maybe a little bit more. I never get super precise when it comes to working with color, and that's one of those, maybe that's a downfall of mine, but you know, I do just enough to make it work. So I think that's going to work just fine for me. Next, let's bring in another piece of footage here. Let's go with maybe number 6. And actually, before we do that, let's undo that. Let's just duplicate this Fiery Plume 4. And let's go back to number 6. And we're going to hold down Alter Option, click and drag to replace. And maybe bring this guy over here. And yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that a lot. Let's kind of work on the positioning here a little bit. Let's bring down the scale, maybe 55, make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, I like that. That's looking pretty cool. Awesome. Let's go ahead and duplicate again. So Command D to duplicate. And let's bring in, we've got 4, 6. Let's bring in number 10. Alter Option, click or drag to bring it down. Oh yeah, I like that one a lot. We're going to bring this, now because we took the time to separate these layers in Photoshop, I'm able to bring this layer behind the boat here, and it kind of just sits back there, which is really nice. Gives it some extra realism. Yeah, I'm really digging that a lot. I could always, you know, play around with the start point of this footage, maybe dragging this out a little bit. I really like the plume that happens here. It gives a lot of motion to this piece that doesn't exist because this is still photography. So that works pretty well. Cool. Okay, so what can we do next to make this even look better, right? Let's start bringing in some textures. Let's lay them over the top. Let's give it even more depth. And to do that, we're going to go into our textures here, and we're going to find this image right here, which I can't remember where I got this, but I want to say it was probably off the web. And let's go ahead and scale this up. Something like so. Let's make it 3D so it reacts to the camera. And let's go ahead and drag it down here. And let's just make sure that it's inside the image, the inside the camera frame. I don't want to see any edges like we just saw right here. So let's make sure it's covered there. Let's go back. Yeah, so we need to scale it up just a little bit more. Maybe something like this. Perfect. Love it. So let's hit toggle switches modes. Let's go back to our mode and let's go to add. And yeah, you can see like, I mean, it created some really interesting, some depth there, but you know what can make it even more interesting? So that's not kind of sitting on the same plane as our boat. Because you can see like if you were to look at this scratch right here and look how it sits at this point in the boat. As I move through the image here, it's always tied to that place in the boat. But if we separate this scratch from the boat, it's going to give it even more depth. So I'm going to hit P for position, and I'm going to go the opposite way here. I'm going to bring this really close to the camera. Like let's go -1000. So now it's really close to the camera. And because we did this, we can actually probably scale it back down to something a little bit smaller. You know, maybe something in here. So you can see now that it's created even more depth, right? We've got more parallax happening, more depth because this texture is here in the foreground. Now, one thing I can do is to make this texture a little more soft is I can turn on depth of field for our camera. So I can hit AA and I can turn on depth of field right here by clicking this button and it's on. Now we don't see a lot happening because we need to play around with some of our settings here. So let's do that. So what I like to play around with is typically this aperture, and I'm just going to crank it up to something like 100. So again, now this is very soft. So if I turn the camera depth of field off, you can see it really gets crisp with these details, even though this image is really blown up. But when I turn the camera depth of field on, there's texture there, but it's much more subtle, right? So now you can see it kind of looks like we have this like maybe like some noise over the lens, right? There's something there. So that's going to work for now. And let's next go in here to film strip. Let's drop this in here. Thought this was really cool. Really like the way this looks. Make it a 3D layer as well. And let's rotate this. 270 degrees, sure. Scale, we're going to scale it up a little bit. And we actually need to, before we do this, let's just scale it up slightly here. Maybe like 105. Position, let's bring it really close to the camera like the other texture. So we'll go negative 1000. And then I just want to see the edge here. So let's position it here. And let's go, I don't know, maybe let's go negative here. Let's see if we can find something interesting to look at. Okay, so I really like that a lot, that number. And let's make sure that we are kind of keeping that film strip over the whole time. Now, maybe our camera moves too far to the right. I'm not sure yet. I'm not totally sold on this. Maybe we'll bring it over like this. And let's make this guy the screen mode. And you can immediately see, again, it looks like now we've got some like overlaid film textures, which we do. It just kind of gives it some more life here in the foreground. I really like that a lot. Let's close these down. Let's save our project. Next, we're going to bring in some moving textures here from Motion Science. This one is called Film Textures Dirt. Bring that over the top here. Let's make it a 3D layer. And actually, let's go ahead and set it back to screen. Just like that. P for position. We're going to bring it to, let's go negative 1000. Let's scale it way down because this is a 4K image. And if I solo this, you're going to see what it is. It's just dirt, right? So I can see these kind of splotches that pop up here. And they look a little blurry because we have the camera depth of field on. So it's just some really interesting splotchy film effects. We're going to make sure that this is in the screen the entire time. And you know, I feel like my camera moves a little too much, maybe. So I really want the film strip to kind of be lined up at the edge here, like so. Maybe even a little closer in like that. And maybe the camera move here doesn't start quite so far over. So maybe it's somewhere up in here. Yeah, I think that's working. And let's make sure that this is in the frame the entire time. So we need to scale it up just a little bit more, maybe in there. Now, something I want to do here is like when I see it right here, I want to play around with the color correction of this blotch here. So if I solo that, go to Effect, Color Correction Curves. All I have to do is bring down this white level, maybe somewhere in here. And it makes it sit just a little bit nicer here in the composition. So this is with and without. Yeah, so it's a very subtle effect, but it gives it some life at certain moments. So if I preview this, let's take a look at it. Okay, so there's what we got so far. You can see it's some really interesting depth because we've been adding textures over the top. We've got that action VFX footage in the background that's giving it this cinematic motion quality that's bringing life to a still photograph, right? By adding this footage back here, it's bringing some life to this photograph. So let's add a couple more elements here from action VFX. Let's go up here to the project and let's find what I'm looking for here, which is right here, Lens Dirt 8. It's a texture they've got. I thought it was really cool, and I'm going to make it 3D position. Now this one, I'm not going to go all the way back to 1,000. I'm going to go somewhere maybe around 800 or so. And I'm also going to scale this guy down. Oh, somewhere maybe in here, and then hit P for position and bring this guy over in here maybe. You know, that's kind of interesting up in here. I like that a lot. Let's also duplicate this guy and let's bring another one. Maybe over here on this side. Something like that. And let's set both of these to screen. So now you can see with and without, right? So they bring this kind of, they bring a lot of atmosphere again. So we're building these textures upon each other. And at the same time, they're creating additional depth because we've got our camera in here, really digging what's going on here. Next, let's bring in some close fog. Let's do this. This is from Action VFX as well. And we're going to set this to a 3D layer. And there's our fog. And we are going to, if I can stop opening up Premiere for some reason, somehow keep clicking on that. Back here in After Effects, let's set this to screen as well. And let's scale it up a little bit. Let's hit P for position. Let's go. So these were -700. Maybe this one's at -500-ish. Somewhere in there. And I'm letting my ADD go here so I can just get these kind of laid out for you in a quick manner. Otherwise, I'll be sitting here all day. Let's see here. Let's move this guy around a little bit. Maybe in here. So what I'm looking for here is just some very subtle fog up here near the foreground, and you can see it here. So let's see if we can see it in motion. So I'm just rendering a little section of it here, and I can't really see that close fog, right? I know if I get the settings right, I can bring some interesting visual interest here to the foreground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select close fog, effect, color correction, curves. And I'm going to bring curves in, and I'm going to set a point around up in here, kind of bring up those black values, bring down those white values. And you can see what it does. It really just brightens up that fog. And I want to see, so I can definitely see it more now. So let's preview this and see how it looks. So there's the close fog. It's very hard to see, right? It's very hard to see. I think if I was to kind of play around with a little bit more, like I can see that fog there. I can see it just moving. Maybe let's kind of drag it down here a little bit more. See if I can maybe not play around with this a little bit more. I mean, it's real subtle. The thing that's bothering me at this point is when I see these flickers, this film grime come on, it's just a little too in your face. And that's something we have to be aware of when we are adding textures. We don't want to overdo it. So I'm actually going to drop down the size of this a little bit more. And we drag this over. Something like this. Actually, I got to increase the size again just a bit. And then maybe I think I'm going to blur this out just a hair. Let's go to blur and sharpen and Gaussian blur, and let's just give it maybe like, actually just go like a 3. Just a little bit of a blur there. I like that. Next, let's bring in one more texture. I know we're bringing in a lot of textures here, but let's bring in one more texture. This is Film Textures Matte. This is from Motion Science as well. And we're going to hit P for position. Actually, let's make it 3D. Like so. Scale. And this is a 4K element, so let's scale it down quite a bit because I want to see it here on the edges. Let's go to set this to multiply. Like so. And let's also hit P for position. Let's bring it to -500. I want to see the bottom edge just like that. So it kind of gives it this interesting framing down here. Now, something I have to watch out for is this line here. So maybe if I bring it over like that. Yeah, because I don't want the line to overlap the numbers here. I really like how the numbers look. And I gotta watch again the bottom frame here. That's working pretty nice. One thing we can do here to give it a little bit more life and to kind of help bring some of these elements off and on and give it even more depth is I can hit AA, and for my focus distance here, I can actually add an expression. And we are going to Alt Option click on focus distance, and we're going to type in wiggle, and we're going to put in the values 3,2000. So that says 3 times per second you are going to wiggle at, or you're going to change the focus distance a value of 2000. That can be a positive 2000 or a negative 2000. So we had our focus distance. If I turn it off, our focus distance was set to 1857. So I'm telling the camera you can go up to 3857, or you can subtract 2000, which would be what, negative something below 0. So if we preview this, let's check out what it's going to do. You can see immediately some of these elements are in focus to begin with, and now they're kind of going out of focus a little bit. Now they're back in focus very quickly. There's a quick shift of focus there. It goes really out of focus. And we have to watch that because we don't want it to be too out of focus. So hopefully it comes back in here. Here it comes. It's coming back in. That's looking pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to preview this. Yeah, and so you can see right there, it's just a little bit too much of a pull of focus there. So we're just going to continue to preview here, looking at the details, how often it goes, out of focus, how far does it go out of focus? Is it too much? It's very important that we kind of, do pay attention to these things. Like I do feel like it's maybe going out of focus too much at this point. So let me go ahead and finish it and we'll come back. So there we go. It's looking pretty cool. It's too much of a focus pull when we get to a couple points here. Like right here, it's too much. And right there, it's too much. So what we can do is we can try and dial back 2000. We can maybe try 1000 and see how that looks. And there's our preview. And I really dig that. It's looking pretty cool to me. I could tweak this all day long, and maybe I would try. I like it when the focus goes very quickly out of focus. The camera goes very quickly out of focus and then comes very quickly back in, which we were getting at before, but it was just too extreme. So maybe I'd try having it do a little bit more, like maybe 4, and I'll check that in the next preview. But before we do check that, let's actually stop here and let's finish out this piece. What I do here to finish this is I put an effects layer at the top, which is pretty typical of what I do. And I'm actually going to use a Sapphire plugin here that I absolutely love. And it is called Film Effect. and it just does an amazing job. Sapphire's got some really awesome presets built into it, so I absolutely love Sapphire. Most pros I know are using Sapphire for their own work, and I don't remember the exact filter I picked. If I go through these really quickly here, I mean, you can see there's just some really nice ones. And I think it was actually this one right down here called Starfield. I'll load that in. Let us do his thing. Yeah, I like that a lot. Now there's a little bit of blown out, or not blown out, but really some of the fog here I think is maybe overdoing it a bit. So if I take that out, yeah, you can see we lose a lot of the contrast here. So let's bring this fog in front of our film mat, like so. And let's also take the transparency down a bit. Something like that. Let's preview this. Also keeping in mind that we changed our wiggle expression here for depth of focus distance. And before I preview it, I actually want to tell you guys, if you don't have Sapphire, I'm going to save this really quickly. If you don't have Sapphire, something you can easily do here is you can go into color correction, lumetri color, and play around with some of the creative filters here. There's some nice blue ones. Maybe something like blue steel is nice. And then you can, you know, take down the intensity, kind of get a mix in between. You could take up the faded film. You could take down the saturation. You could play around with the shadow tints and highlights and things like that. You can also get a really nice look this way. So don't feel like you have to use Sapphire Film Effect. It's just one of my plugins I really like to use. And I'm gonna go ahead and preview this. Getting close, getting real close. Getting real close here. A couple things I want to change here. And this is what it's all about. It's all in these details, right? To finalize this piece to make it look even better. I'm going to go with 4 and 2000. I know we started with 3 and 2000, but I think 4 and 2000's gonna get it just right. And this texture is really bugging me here. This one is just too powerful. So we're gonna go to Effect, Color Correction, and we're gonna go to Levels here. And we're gonna bring in our values, something like this with the blacks, and bring some of the grays. So we're just reducing the amount of texture we see. So with levels and without. So you can see it's a lot more subtle this way and really cleans up the image. I mean, it was really bothering me. It was too much texture, right? Now maybe it's not quite enough texture. This is that balance game you got to play. Just want a little bit there. And let's double click on, yeah, that's really nice lens dirt up there from Action VFX. I'm gonna bring in this one just a bit, kind of bring some dirt over the top here. And you can see what it does to this smoke back here. It really kind of blends it into the background, really helps it a lot. And then the other thing is this texture mat here. Again, it's just a little too much for me. So I'm trying to minimize some of it. And it might be that the camera move is a little bit too much. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and save. And before we preview this one last time here, let's change one more thing here, which is under the camera settings. Let's change it from fast rectangle to something in here. Now this is going to increase the render time quite a bit, but it creates a much nicer depth of field effect. So when the camera goes out of focus, it looks a little bit more realistic. Fast rectangle has the name for a reason. That's what the camera defaults to, fast rectangle, because it does render very quickly. But when you're looking for something that looks a little bit nicer and you want to finish the piece out, I highly recommend that you switch to one of the other presets besides fast rectangle. And there, my friends, is our finished piece. Really happy with how it turned out. It shows what you can do with still images, some awesome footage from Action VFX, a couple textures from Action VFX, some textures from Motion Science, and all that jazz. So if you enjoyed this, you're going to find even more courses over at motionscience.tv. Thanks for watching. Once again, my name is Cameron, and this is Motion Science.